A lot of these newer homes, especially in the United States, are very airtight, so they don't breathe. And so they get stale air, high CO2 levels, the VOCs, the chemical load builds up in the house, and then we breathe that stuff in. And so a home that doesn't breathe is a big problem. Um, and then water quality. Our water quality is just getting worse and worse and worse. There's just more and more crap in it, especially if you're living in a place where you're using reclaimed water, like a big city.
Thank you so much for joining us on another awesome episode of Bioenergetics Beat. I'm Heather Gray, a functional diagnostic nutrition practitioner and certified bioenergetic practitioner. And today is brought to you by Nikki, Unleash the Wellness Within. It's a non-invasive, easily affordable, highly effective approach to optimize your wellness. It's a wearable device that puts frequency better based life in your hands and on your wrist. Make sure to stick to the very, very end because we have a special giveaway that you're not going to want to miss out. But as usual, you're not going to want to miss out on one word that my next guest has to say, because we're going to be digging deep into mold, your home, homesickness, like so many things that were a part of my healing journey. And I know as a part of your healing journey. So you're not going to want to miss one word that comes out of this amazing man's mouth. So without further ado, let's welcome Ryan Blaser to the show.
Yay! Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Like I said, I didn't even know that a building biologist was such a thing, and that what you do is like a legit thing out there. And there definitely needs to be more of you out there because, especially like in the Colorado area where I was from, I didn't run across a whole lot of people who could help diagnose, dirty electricity or mold in the house properly or some of the EMF stuff. So I commend you for the work that you do. Can you tell us a little bit about yourself and kind of why you got started in this line of work?
Yeah, so I've been doing environmental toxicology work for about 25 years in different industries, working for government agencies and stuff. And I'd say about 15 years ago, I moved into a home that had a pretty severe mold problem. I didn't know at the time that it was moldy. I just got really sick to the point where I couldn't keep food down, losing a lot of weight in the hospital, and went to different doctors. They wanted to take my gallbladder out. They thought I had stomach cancer. I kept getting second opinions because I didn't think that that was really it. I wanted to figure out really what was causing it. Finally went to a functional medicine doctor where their whole goal is, instead of cut me up or give me prescriptions, let's find the root cause. And so that was kind of my introduction to functional health and looking at root cause to find the actual source of my problem, which was in fact mold. My body was chock full of mycotoxins from Stachybotrys, and I was poisoning myself. So I moved out of the house. It took me about a year or so to recover. I never fully recovered. I'm still highly allergic to eggs and gluten because of that. My body was just rejected everything. I was sensitive, got sensitive to EMF, got sensitive to chemicals, got sensitive to a lot of foods. My body was just on high alert because of the mold. Better now. And so, I started learning more about the environment and how it affects our body negatively. I went back to schooling for building biology, which is the study of how the building affects our body, which to me is fascinating. We live in these boxes, we work in these boxes, and we're spend up to 90% of our lives indoors. And I look at that as like our second skin. We have the skin of our body, and inside our body, we have a lot of things going on. But then inside of our house, we have a lot of things going on, chemical wise, air quality, EMF, lighting, all these things affect us. They get inside our body and they can either affect us for positive or negative. So we started this company diving into people's homes and really determine what's the causing factor for their health problems.
Absolutely. What kind of training, and where do you go to do what it is that you do? Because like I said, up until very recently, I didn't even know people out there like you existed.
Yeah, so there's actually a Building Biology Institute, and you can Google that online, and you can take courses online, and then they do in-person seminars where you can get certified to do this type of work. It's pretty fascinating. They've been around for a long time in Germany for 80 years, and they kind of brought that over to the United States about 30 years ago. It's just starting to get more and more traction.
So how do you, because my doctor used to joke with me because I'm so sensitive to mold. I'm like the canary in the coal mine, and I can walk into a building and within minutes I can tell if there's an issue. And she's like, "Oh, I would love to send you out to my client's house and see if they've got mold." I'm like, "I thought you liked me. Why would you do
Yeah.
that to me? Like, it makes me sick. Like I would be spending my whole, the next week detoxing from that one house." So how do you protect yourself when you're in and out of some of these homes, especially with the exposure you've had in the past?
Yeah, there's a couple ways I deal with it. If the occupants are sick, or I'm seeing signs that there's mold, I'll mask up and wear a suit and protect myself when I'm in the house. But also, I'll take charcoal binders at the end of the day if I got an exposure. Take caprylic acid. There's some other supplements that I'll take to help break down the mold in my body. When it's fresh in your body and hasn't been deposited in your fat and in your bones and stuff, you can usually pull it out of the bloodstream a lot easier. And so, taking binders and supplements on a regular basis, in combination with protecting myself, is how I avoid it.
Some of the statistics out there are really unnerving. Like over 50% of homes have been water damaged, the dirty electricity. I found out recently that we stopped painting with lead paint, which was great because we don't need lead, but the reason they were using the lead was that it killed the mold. And we're building homes with, mold's favorite, food, drywall and a lot of these other things. So if you get a person who's sick or, sensitive like myself, don't have the detox genes to properly detox this stuff well, like, I mean, what are we supposed to do? Live in a bubble? Like how, what's the answer? Like, how do we fix this?
Yeah, for one, you got to be a little bit more diligent about the environment that you live in and make sure that all of your toxins are to a minimum. And that can be mental toxins too, or, emotional toxins. All those things are toxic to the body, but eating really clean diet, using non-toxic chemicals so that your body can process a lot better. But also, you need to do some limbic system training because for situations like you where your body is just kind of like red alert to this stuff. So even you just get a little bit into your system, your body's like, I remember this. This is bad. We're going to give you some symptoms right away. And that can be a good or a bad thing. It can be a good thing as in your body's letting you know right off the bat where other people it wouldn't let them know, and your body's just collecting these toxins. But it also, you have to be a lot more diligent about your environment.
Absolutely. Great advice. I love the nervous system retraining, the limbic retraining. I know it was like the final linchpin in my healing journey. I would get, unfortunately, God love functional practitioners, but they're still just kind of focused on the physical.
Mhm.
And, for the longest time, I was never, focusing on the mental, emotional, the nervous system retraining, the early childhood trauma that actually helped me be more susceptible to this stuff to begin with. Because a lot of people don't realize that three people can live in a house, right? One person can get really, really sick from it, and the other two have no symptoms. And a lot of times it has to do with your detox protocols and, what kind of nervous stuff you got going on in your nervous system, what kind of trauma you have stored in the body. So thank you for bringing that part up. Um, what are some of the more common things that you're seeing in homes these days that most people aren't talking about as far as like affecting the health?
Yeah, obviously mold, we talked about that, but using a lot of toxic chemicals and fragrances. Fragrances are in almost everything. The cosmetics, the personal care products, the cleaning supplies. Um, of course, hopefully we're not using the Glade plugins anymore, but we still see that. That's putting toxic
I
chemicals in.
throw those away. If I'm in a public place and I see one in the bathroom, I
Yeah.
throw it
Well,
away.
you're doing everybody a favor by doing that. A lot of these newer homes, especially in the United States, are very airtight, and so they don't breathe. And so they get stale air, high CO2 levels, the VOCs, the chemical load builds up in the house, and then we breathe that stuff in. And so a home that doesn't breathe is a big problem. Um, and then water quality. Our water quality is just getting worse and worse and worse. There's just more and more crap in it, especially if you're living in a place where you're using reclaimed water like a big city, you're getting a lot of pharmaceuticals in there. You're getting microplastics. There's PFOAs. There's tons of stuff in the water. So really important that we're filtering our waters. And then electronic exposure. More and more things are going wireless, more and more technology, more and more fun stuff, smart homes. All these things are adding a lot of artificial or non-native EMF to the body that's affecting our nervous system. So I would say those are really the main ones I'm seeing.
Absolutely, absolutely. When I was trying to think where we wanted to go with this because, like I said, there's so many different areas to the sick, but we kind of wanted to focus on the mold. So I know after watching the docuseries Home Sick Home, which was an amazing docuseries and so chock full of so much information. So if you're like wondering where do I even start, like this is a great place to start. We'll put the link in the show notes. But you were talking about, if you see mold, you need to find the water source, right? Like mold needs water. Can you go into that into a little bit more?
Yep, mold is an organism just like us. It needs food and water. And the food's going to be any organic material. So paper, leaves, dead skin cells, grass, that kind of, the sandwich that you left out, that's where the mold's going to grow, but it needs water. So typically there's types of molds that will grow off higher humidity. So 80% and higher, we can have mold that just spontaneously grows. There are types of molds like black mold, Stachybotrys, that requires actual 100% saturation for a good amount of time, like a chronic leak. And so when we're looking for mold, it's a lot easier as inspectors to look for water damage or talk about the history of home. Did we have a toilet that overflowed? Did we have a roof leak? Does the windows get condensation on it in the winter times? If we can follow the water, it's going to lead us to the mold.
Absolutely. Absolutely. This is a good spot. We're going to actually pause real quick for a break. When we come back, I want to dive deeper into some of the do's and don'ts when it comes to mold in your house, the things that you can do, the things that you should hire out for, and the things that you should look for when you hire somebody. Because there's a lot of shysters out there in the mold remediation company, and I think one of the first lessons I learned was never use the same company, right, for testing for remediation, because that's just a conflict of interest. And most people don't realize that. So I want to dive deeper into those kind of ins and outs and some of the wives' tales of what actually can kill mold and what doesn't, and all that fun stuff when we come back. So stay tuned. Don't go anywhere. We'll be right back.
Hey guys, I wanted to tell you a little bit about my favorite and probably my most impactful frequency that I use on the Nikki. If you've never seen this before, it looks like a little watch, but it's actually a frequency device with a bunch of different frequencies. It's bioenergetic, so it has this little frequency light situation that goes into your arm, and it pretty much makes an immediate difference. But my personal favorite frequency is the insomnia one. If you know me, you know I don't sleep at night. I'm known for like those middle of the night texts and random thoughts, and I have been that way my whole life, not just since I got sick with tick-borne illness. But the Nikki nighttime and or insomnia frequency is basically programmed to work with your body's natural resources to get you to go to sleep and get you set for nighttime. It helps with cellular repair and detoxification overnight, which is super important for everyone, but especially with people with Lyme and tick-borne illness like me. So I just wanted to kind of demystify it and share a little bit about it. And if you have any questions, leave them in the comments. Bye.
Nikki Wellness Technology. Delivering frequency enhanced health. We are Nikki.com.
Fantastic. So looking forward to diving into the nuts and bolts, because there's so much controversial, like wise tell information when it comes to dealing with mold in your home. Can you please shed some light for us?
Yes, I can. Yeah. Anything specific you want me to start off on?
Give us some of the more common, wise tells that, ozone works or vinegar works or bleach or just paint over it. It's fine. Some of the things that you kind of see on a regular basis.
Yeah, I mean, all those things. But I mean, bleach is probably the biggest one. People put bleach on it, spray bleach on it. What that does is it bleaches out the color, but it leaves a lot of the roots and things behind. Also, it doesn't last long enough for it to actually kill everything off. And bleach has moisture in it, so it can actually feed the mold. It's not going to make it go away. Another one is encapsulation. Some people think, oh, if we have mold growing on the wall or something, just paint over it and it'll be fine. The problem is it can still continue to grow back behind the wall. So we want to make sure we're physically removing mold anytime we can. And if it's growing into a porous material, which I would include drywall as that, you need to remove it and replace it with something new. But especially like clothes or carpet or furniture or any porous material, plants, pictures, books, we've got to throw that stuff away. There's really no cleaning that. When it comes to the structure of the house, we can sand stuff down if we need to, HEPA remove it, wipe it. Um, but for the most part, we need to cut that stuff out, just like if it was cancer. Another one is air samples. A lot of times when you call up a remediation company, they're going to show, or a testing company, they're going to show up with some air samples. They're going to collect an air sample outside, and they're going to collect a couple inside and run that to the lab and see what do we have actually in the air at the time. The problem is with that is a lot of time the mold isn't necessarily in the air. The mold is a lot of times behind the walls or under the sink or in the attic or in the crawl space. And so we have to get a lot closer to the source. Sometimes we have to disturb the source and then we can use an air sample. But a lot of times it's easier and more productive to use dust sampling to tell us, okay, what is in the dust, what has been in the air that's now settled in the dust, because mold spores have weight to them. They don't stay suspended in the air forever. Within 24 hours, they've settled down onto the surface. And now we can take a swab of that dust and send it to the lab, and it's going to give us a more accurate reading of what's going on in the home. And you can use ERMIs for that. You can use swab samples for that. But looking at the dust is a lot better way than looking at the air.
That totally makes sense. What are some of the, yeah, you had mentioned throwing everything away, and that's one of the most heartbreaking things as a practitioner that I've had to tell people, who are really sick of like, there's really no way around it. And Dr. Kim Bruno with Vibrant Labs had the best analogies. He's like, living in a home with mold while you're still trying to heal is like brushing your teeth and eating Oreos at the same time.
Yeah.
You can start to heal, but it's really, really hard if you're still being exposed on a regular basis. And so, why is it so important to throw everything away?
Because the mold itself that's growing behind the sink isn't necessarily what's making you sick. It's the mycotoxins and the mold spores that are coming off of that are floating through the air that land on the surface, and then we breathe them in or we ingest them, or they get in our food and we eat it. You plop down on the couch, puts up a little plume of mold spores and we breathe that in. It's the contamination that comes off the mold that's important. So just think if you had in your house, somebody was smoking a cigarette in one of the rooms, you could put the cigarette out, but then you still have the smoke that's throughout your house. And so that's what needs to be cleaned up. And then when remediation work, that's typically one thing that people don't do is they don't do that cleanup afterwards. And that's really a big problem because they'll cut the mold out, but then they won't fix the contamination. So really good deep clean, they call it a fine particle cleaning or a deep hygienic cleaning to remove everything. Now, the problem is these porous materials like the couch or books or things where these mold spores and mycotoxins can inundate, and it's very difficult to get those things out. So a lot of times with clients, if they're like, I don't want to throw stuff away, it's sentimental. Okay, hey, let's at least get a storage shed for now, and let's put everything in the storage shed and just go with the bare minimums, and let's start getting you better. Okay, and then once you start getting better, maybe go take that couch out and lay on it and see if it starts affecting you. If you start getting affected within 30 minutes or something, you know that you don't want to go back down that road, and so you might need to sell it or get rid of it at that point. Probably just get rid of it if it's toxic. So where it comes into a problem is like sentimental items like books and keepsakes and pictures and things like that. But I've had clients where they'll just scan those in and get a digital copy of everything, and they're good to go because it's not worth getting sick over.
Oh, absolutely. And I've actually heard some stories of when they were transporting their stuff, it actually cross-contaminated their car. And so then their car then developed a mold problem. Like, how often do you see that?
Yeah, we see that too. But then you ask, like, well, do rental cars and restaurants, and when I go sit in the chairs on the bus, am I getting cross-contaminated? Yeah, and eventually this is all kind of spreading. That's why you say there's mold spores everywhere. But the further we get from the source, the less and less the exposure gets.
Okay, well, that makes me feel a little bit better because I don't want to be a bubble girl.
Yeah.
And then coming to Puerto Vallarta, Mexico, where it's very humid and there is an issue with mold, but not all mold is created equal and not all mold causes issues in the body. I've noticed even physically, I stayed with a friend in New York where she had some visible mold and it didn't affect me the 3 or 4 days that I was there. And like I said, there's other buildings where I can go in and I'm infected immediately. So not all mold is created the same and have the same effect on the body, thank God. But so being careful. What about fogging? I know that's kind of a controversial thing as well. Like, people are like, I want to save things, and I've heard about fogging. And I think we even had somebody talk about that on the Homesick Home documentary. So what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, that comes back to the physical removal part. It's kind of like if you had a garden and you had a bunch of weeds growing in your garden. Yeah, you could go spray it or fog it and you would kill them, but they're still there. And so just because the mold is dead doesn't mean it's not affecting you anymore. Dead mold can still affect you. And fogging also doesn't take care of the mycotoxins, which is really the part that's making you really sick. So still have the mold spore there. It's dead, it's inert, it's not going to grow anymore, but it's still there. And so we can fog to do a mass kill, but that needs to be in conjunction with the cleaning. But sometimes if we're just doing a good cleaning or we got mold that we're cutting out and removing anyways, then we don't necessarily need to fog. But fogging can be a part of the step, but it's not the step. It's not the main thing.
Gotcha. Well,
Doesn't magically make it disappear and remove it.
okay, no, that totally makes sense. Thank you for that. So, with this last couple, 6, 7 minutes that we have, can you break down just like, okay, these are the type of things that you can handle on your own, and this is when you should bring somebody in, and also kind of like, what are you looking for? What kind of questions did you ask when you're working with a mold professional, right? To know that you've got somebody who's on the up and up and the right kind of training, because not all these people are trained properly.
Yeah, if you feel like there could be a problem, for example, you go on vacation or go to a friend's house, go to work, and you feel fine, and then you go back to your house, you start getting sick, or you moved into a place and your health was fine, and now all of a sudden you find that your health is not as good as it used to be, and every other thing has stayed the same. Then we want to start asking the question about water and tracking down the water. Has there been any leaks lately? Has been any roof leaks, any leaks underneath the sinks, the toilet, behind the washing machine, behind the fridge? Go to the different places in your house where we have water, the showers, and really look in those areas very carefully. Do we see any bubbling of the paint? Do we see any wood that's warping or cracks that's developing? Is there a funny smell in that area? These are all initial signs that we could have something going on. You can also do the ERMI dust analysis or just the regular dust analysis test to see if we have an abnormal amount of mold spores in your home. If any of these things are showing yes, or coming back positive, that's when it's a good idea to call a good mold testing company. And like you mentioned before, make sure you're choosing a company that doesn't do remediation. They need to be completely separate. We want to hire a company that's their main job day in and day out is testing for mold and finding the mold sources. Otherwise, I mean, you can call around. Sometimes you'll get people say, "We'll do a mold test for free." What you're getting is a salesperson for a remediation company. They're coming out there to try to get a job for their company, and that's why it's either really cheap, $500 or less, or sometimes free. And if that's the case, you're getting a salesman, not a mold inspector. And so you should be paying, at least, some people charge dollars square foot to do mold testing for their house. They should be there, if it's a 3,000 square foot home, they should be there at least 6 hours going through your house with a fine tooth comb. I mean, looking in your air conditioning system, in your attic, in your crawl space, behind your appliances, using moisture meter in the walls, drilling cavity samples, trying to find exactly where the source is. If they're coming in just to do an air sample inside and out, that's not what we're looking for. We need someone that's going to actually find the source, tell us how bad our mold contamination is, what kind of molds we have, and then have a plan for us. What's the remediation plan look like so that you can take that and go to different remediation companies and shop that out and get that problem fixed.
Absolutely. I think all too often people still kind of, poo-poo mold in the home. And, I can't remember if it's Leviticus, but, in the Bible, they were talking about mold in the caves, in your homes. And if you clean it this way and it doesn't get better, basically telling them to move, so it's, the dangers of this has been around a long time. And I know firsthand, I had exposure from a window AC unit last summer that was blowing on me. And I kind of knew something was up, but I was being gaslit by my ex. And finally one day I couldn't be gaslit anymore. Like I knew what was going on. I was like, take that thing out. And when he did, it was just water everywhere. But I remember starting arguments with him like 4 nights a week, every time I was in the kitchen was right where that thing was blowing on me, so, it definitely affects the body and the brain in so many different ways with people. Like I remember when you were talking about your story, what were some of the symptoms and the signs that you kind of went through?
Yeah, I mean, irritability is definitely a big one that we see. Brain fog, fatigue is a big one. Not being able to keep food down, intestinal problems, rashes on the skin, autoimmune issues, respiratory type things, stuffy nose, watery eyes, itchy throat. These are all symptoms that we typically see from mold.
Yeah, it's not all in your head. And that's part of my campaign of being nice to the Karens in the world, because Karens don't become Karens for no reason. Karens probably have some brain inflammation. Maybe they're being exposed to mold. Who knows? But you never know. If at that time, we had enough sense to step back and go, oh, Heather, why are you acting this way? Because that's not typically my MO, right? To be that reactive and that angry.
Yeah.
We would have been able to figure it out sooner, instead of, it took us like 3 months for me to figure out what was going on in my own home. But once I did, I was able to clean it up and clear up the situation within like a week or two, thank God.
Yeah.
because of the tools that I have, but not everybody, has that. So, if you have a loved one or even yourself, are experiencing like personality changes, right? Don't go to the shrink and get on drugs. Maybe check your house first and see, what kind of air and mold or other issues you might be having. So what's like a little last nugget you want to drop on us before we sign off?
Biggest thing about mold and any environmental issues is don't stress out about it. Do what you can, learn the education, but don't stress out. I have people where I come in and we find mold and they break down crying. They think they've been killing their family this whole time.
Mm.
The stress of this stuff is sometimes worse than the exposure that we're getting to it. So just take things small improvements, baby steps. We'll meet you where you're at and help you improve. But definitely don't stress out about it. That's one of the biggest things I see people doing is really stressing out about mold. And you need to be conscious of it, but don't stress about it.
Absolutely. That is great advice because that's the one I'm having to learn living in this new environment. I felt myself get all, constricted, and I was like, wait, I can't do that, Heather. Like that's going to bring something else on, regardless if there is mold in the thing, because of just the stress that it was causing. And so just reminding myself that I'm healthy and I'm protected and that I'm okay, and keeping the nervous system calmed down. Because
Yep.
even if you didn't have mold in the house, if you kind of go in with those expectations, it's kind of like a self-fulfilling prophecy.
Absolutely. Yeah. 100%.
So we're at the shameless plug time of the show. Like I said, we'll put in the show notes the link to the docu-series, but also how can people find you directly?
Yeah, testmyhome.com is our main webpage. Also on Instagram at testmyhome. Those are really the two sources. You can get to us that way and work with us. Happy to help you out.
Awesome. Also, make sure to visit wearenikki.com/podcast. Enter in BioBeats to get 10% off. And because we really love our customers, the way we show appreciation is we give away a free Nikki device and a wellness set of frequencies, a $598 value on every show. So make sure to go to the show notes to check that out on how you can enter. Good luck. It's that time of the month again. We just picked our winners for May. Congratulations to Rob Schmidt, Lindsay Nelson, April Withers, and Amanda Lee. Congratulations. You won a Nikki frequency device along with a wellness set of frequencies. It's a $598 value. Wow, wow, wow. If you didn't win this time around, sad face. Continue to listen, continue to enter, and help us spread the word. Thanks again. Thanks for joining us and have a healthy day.
Hi, my name is Stephanie. I came to use the Nikki actually through my sister who was working for the company at the time, and she had been speaking to me about the frequencies on there and how it had really helped with stress and anxiety and things like that. And I had thought, well, I have stress and anxiety. Maybe this can help me too. And in addition to therapy and other things I was trying to do to help myself, I thought this might be an additional tool that would help me. The nighttime frequency really helps me with my sleeping. The pain frequency, I have some issues with my shoulders and that seem to have gotten a lot better. These things I knew nothing about when I got it. So it kind of morphed for getting it for one reason and kind of helping with other things. I found actually the biggest benefit I found is I am prone to UTIs. And I was always on medication, always going to the doctor, always getting them. And the first time I got one after I had the Nikki, I thought it has the viruses and bacteria. Let's try it. Well, since then, I've had it for over a year. Normally would have about 5 to 6 UTIs in that time. I've had 2 that I've needed medication for, and the rest I feel it coming on. I put on my viruses and bacteria, and within 3-4 days, it's completely gone. I don't have to have medication. I don't have to go to the doctor or do anything like that. So it's been in that way life-changing for me. I still do use the stress and anxiety, like today for this testimonial. I have that on right now because I'm on camera. So that kind of thing helps me. And I find that when I'm in a stressful situation and I put it on, it helps me almost immediately. I immediately feel calmer, whether that's a frequency or me knowing that it's working or knowing that it's helping in addition to that.
Nikki Wellness Technology. Delivering frequency enhanced health. We are Nikki.com. The views, information, and opinions expressed in this content are solely those of the individuals involved and do not necessarily represent those of Remedica. Remedica Technologies Inc. and its employees are not responsible, nor verifies accuracy any of the information contained in the following content. The primary purpose of this content is to educate and inform. This content does not constitute medical or other professional advice or services.